Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Cloyd, Museum Director here at the National Veterans Memorial Museum, and this is July Spotlight Story. Today, we're going to celebrate the legacy of John Glenn and what he means not only to the museum, but to Columbus as a whole, and really the whole country, as he was a veteran first before becoming an astronaut and a senator and a great public servant to not only our community here in Columbus, but again, across the country. I'm joined today by Amy Taylor from the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation and Dean Trevor Brown from the Ohio State John Glenn College of Public Affairs, two people who intimately knew John Glenn. And we're going to talk a little bit about John Glenn's legacy to them and just to his life here in Columbus and Ohio. So, Amy, we'll start with you. This week would have been John Glenn's 100th birthday. And we know he certainly lived a full life. And one of his last endeavors was to take on the building of this museum, which a lot of visitors have experienced and seen his story up close and personal at the museum. But we say in a lot of our even promos for the museum, this place was inspired by John Glenn. But I'm curious, because you knew him and you were part of this project from the beginning, how did John Glenn inspire you in this project to what it became now, the National Veterans Memorial Museum?
Definitely. Well, he inspired so many of us. And the fact that I had the opportunity to work with him on this project is certainly a highlight in my career. And it started back in 2012. We were asked to take a look at what formerly was called the Franklin County Veterans Memorial. But as you know, it was really a convention center built in the 1950s and named after our greatest generation, but didn't really have those inspirational, educational materials to explain the veteran story. And so we put together a group of veterans to really talk about what the next evolution of that site, and even when we started, if it could be that building. And the veteran that we started with was Senator John Glenn. And he was so committed, as we put together this committee, to make sure there was representation, not just of peacetime and wartime, but of every conflict from World War II to the present. He wanted to make sure we had cultural representation and gender representation. And he then put together this group and asked them to serve in a different way, to be representative of people who they might have known, to not just bring their own experiences, but to bring experiences of the friends that they had and the people that they served with. And when we started that in 2012, it really was a long-held dream. How can we make this a museum for veterans, about veterans, and really inspire other people to serve? And my dad was a veteran, and so we did talk about it around the dinner table, but those conversations are and were occurring fewer and fewer. I mean, Senator Glenn not just served in World War II, but he was a Korean War veteran. So here he served his country twice before ever going to space, which again was that additional service. And then of course, when he went to the Senate, and when he left the Senate and went to the John Glenn College. And so I guess he inspired a group of veterans to really think through what that experience was, in some ways to revisit some of the toughest memories, but also to revisit some of those amazing memories. I'll never forget, we had a veteran talk about that coming home moment. And that he shared his story, and he did that because he was honored to be part of this committee. He was honored to be to be in a room with John Glenn. And he shared that, and I don't know if there was a dry eye in the house. And after every meeting, what I remember is Senator Glenn would stand there, and everyone would come and want their picture. They wanted to talk with him. They wanted to hear his experience. He probably told his experience of going into space 10,000 times in the course of his career and his life. But at least when I heard it, and I probably heard him tell it a few dozen times, it was always with this reverence that he was the custodian of that experience for all of us. And at least to me, in my reaction and viewing, he never seemed to tire of it, but he also never made it about himself. And when I'm often asked if I think that the museum lived up to the ideals that he set about, I answer yes, except he would have been upset about the exhibit about him. That was the one thing. He never wanted it to be about him. He always wanted it to be about everyone else.
If you just met him and knew none of that backstory, you'd have no idea. He was about the most common, decent kind of person you could ever hope to meet. And he always made the story about you rather than about him, which was remarkable. But just picking up on some things Amy said in terms of what it was like to work with him, it was interesting. You kindly said, Andy, that I got to know him intimately. I really only came to know him in that last 10 years of his life, in that final chapter for him. And we had the great luxury of meeting him after he'd had all these remarkable accomplishments and came with such fame and devoted so much time and energy to the National Vets Memorial Museum, and before that, the Glenn College. But he came to join us right after leaving the Senate. And so part of his energy was devoted towards connecting with students and helping to build the college, but also it was clearly a period of reflection for him. And he reflected kind of in reverse order. Because he was just coming out of the Senate, we heard a lot about the machinations of politics in the Senate and bipartisanship and his thoughts about where politics were going. And then around the 40th anniversary of Friendship 7, his orbit of the Earth, he began to tell those stories more frequently. Obviously, that milestone came up again, and he had only recently been back up in space, still to this day, the oldest human being to go back into space at the age of 77. But then came, I think, for him, the most foundational and fundamental reflections, which was about his military service. As he got closer and closer to the end, and he knew it was coming, that was the part he talked more and more about, was his time in the military.
My favorite story about Senator Glenn was also about Annie Glenn, which if you say one, you have to say the other.
Right.
They were so combined. I was walking along Civic Center Drive, and they were walking to Milestone from their place in Miranova, and they were holding hands, and each of them had a cane on the outside hand. And my husband and I were walking. I thought, they've been married 70 years. We need to hold hands. When we would start these meetings with the veterans, his first concern was to make sure Annie had a seat, Annie had water, Annie was taken care of. He always introduced her. That was so important to him, and it was emblematic of who he was as a person. He really believed, I thought, in caring for people. Now, the interesting part is, with all of that humbleness did come that stealing nature that led him to be so successful. So we brought in architects, a landscape architect, exhibit designers, and these were top of their field, nationally and internationally renowned, out of New York. And with the humbleness and graciousness that he was known for, but with that rod of steel, he really inspired them to do their best. That they were not doing their best for him as John Glenn, or even for all the people that were in the room. It was for the millions of people who weren't in that room and may never have come back, and they needed to do their best. And he asked them each for an individual commitment at a meeting, not some, oh, tell me you'll do a good job. He looked them in the eye and said, I want to know that you are going to do your best and that this is going to be a significant experience. And I think they took that seriously, because when we would challenge them on whether they had done their best, they understood the message that we as the team at CDC we were reiterating what Senator Glenn had said, and they're like, got it. We've got to go back. We need to make sure. And so I think while he came with this aw shucks, Cambridge, Ohio attitude, it was there was a lot of steel in there and a lot of firmness for what he believed.
Amy mentioned Annie. I think you can't say one without the other. They were two halves of the same orange. But, for us, they are the embodiment of public service and leadership. And by us, I mean the Glenn College, our alums, our students, but also the university. Their life together, their life's journey, rooted in their faith, rooted in the community, Cambridge and then New Concord, and then in his military service and his long public service. That is a testament to the kind of people that he wanted to see come out of a place like the Glenn College in Ohio State. He would never, the way Amy said, he would never want his name to be associated with it, even though we're obviously very proud to call ourselves the John Glenn College of Public Affairs. But he wanted his story to be repeated. Kid that met his high school or his grade school sweetheart early in his life and stayed together for 70 years. and they were from a small town. And coming to Muskegum College down the road for him was just an opening up of his world, and then serving in the military was this blossoming as well. And I think he hoped that experience could be repeated, that a person of modest means coming from a community that maybe wasn't as dynamic as Columbus or some other place could come and grow and flourish and learn, and then take all that they had learned and give back. And so I think that story is repeated so many times throughout his decorated career that you just couldn't envision a better representative of what it means to be a public hero. And he is absolutely that.
He could have gone anywhere, and instead he chose to come back here. And I guess in some ways that always made me feel special, that he could go anywhere and he chose Columbus. And I think that's a great testament to who he is and who he always was. I didn't obviously know him back when he was going through his military career or when he was going through his NASA career. I remember meeting him a few times during high school trips to DC when he was in the Senate. But when I got to know him, he had already experienced the pinnacle of a career and of a life. And yet he lived it with humbleness and with gratitude, and as Trevor said, with faith and a belief. And so just by being around him, he was inspiring. And one of the things I don't think made it in the Tammy Duckworth video in the museum was about how she said that if he had just done the military experience, that would have been more than a lifetime. But he did so much more. One of the things she also said, I think in the uncut version, was that he did all of this, and yet if you didn't know it, he was never going to be the one to tell you.
No.
Like you almost had to bring up his this amazing career. You had to bring it up to him. Otherwise, he was going to talk about you.
There's a big part of Senator Glenn in the John Glenn College building, which I think Dean Brown is one of the coolest buildings on campus, that a lot of people don't really know about. I mean, they see the name on the building and students walk by, but if you're not in that college or something, or you're not an alumni to that, you may not know what's inside. But there's more than just offices and classrooms and education going on in that building. There's a part of John Glenn in that building. Can you talk about that for a second?
And that actually is a kind of a great metaphor. He was a combination of old and new. Old in the sense that, again, as we talked about, his values were rooted in a sort of tradition of faith and community and service. But he was the consummate innovator, just believed in the power of human ingenuity, and obviously put his life at risk to put himself on top of a thing that humans hadn't sat on before, this giant rocket that shoots him into space. And so he was always thinking about how do we improve and how do we continue to innovate. And so this building is, interestingly, it's one of the oldest buildings on campus. It was the 9th building built here at Ohio State University, and it is the first named building for a gentleman named Henry Folsom Page, who, interestingly, like Senator Glenn, had no direct connection to Ohio State University. He was a lawyer, and upon his death, bequeathed his estate to the university because he saw so much power in the institution and the ability to transform lives. And so he gave his money and his estate, and it built this building. Well, around the time that Senator Glenn was retiring from the Senate, they basically took the building apart except for its facade. So if you're walking around the Oval, you'll see these beautiful Greek columns and a staircase that sort of welcomes you into the building. But once you come inside the building, it looks like nothing you would envision had you thought, oh, I'm going to walk into it, as you say, an office building. It was designed with his space experience in mind. So as you come in one of the stairways, it's like you're walking up to the launch pad, and his office, which I am sitting in now, and this is his office, not mine, it appears to sort of orbit or float in space. And so it gives you that feel of I'm about to take off and lift up into space, conjuring up that part of his life. As a result, we have some wonderful artifacts from that. Just outside this office is the joystick to Friendship 7, which is just on its own kind of amazing to see this device that controlled this orbiting space can. But it's also a great story in that Senator Glenn was one of the astronauts who advocated for the ability of astronauts to control the devices, because initially NASA said, you know, a monkey could do this. So we're just going to shoot people up and we just want to see how your body reacts. And he said, you know, something might go wrong. And if you're going to put me in there, I want the ability to control this thing. And you brought us in because we're pilots and we're exceptional at this. And lo and behold, if you've watched, you know, The Right Stuff or any of the movies, you know, he lost radio contact, and that re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere is so critical. That joystick became essential, and it demonstrated the power of a human to navigate space. So we're so proud to have that. The second related fun artifact is on the ground floor. We have a piece of the moon, a little rock that was given to him as a gift from Neil Armstrong on the 40th anniversary of Friendship 7. And at the ceremony, Neil Armstrong presented this thing, and Senator Glenn looks at it and says, well, thank you, Neil. This looks like a piece of concrete. How am I to know that this isn't just a piece of your driveway? And then he paused and said, well, either way, I know your foot was on it. So he had a great sense of humor. But the last artifact I'll say, and forgive the digression, but just over here is a globe. He was a lovely, I mean, he loved maps. There's maps all over the building, and is reflecting his love of exploration. And it's every time he came into the office, he would sit down at the desk where I'm sitting now, and he'd tap this globe, and I don't know if you can see this over, it would light up. And he'd shout across the hall to his assistant, Kathy Dancy, and he'd say, hey, Kathy, I'm turning the world on. And then at the end of the day, he'd tap it and say, I'm turning the world off. Well, in the last 6 months of his life, he wasn't coming into the office, but he was still active, and he would call her on the phone early in the morning and say, hey, what's going on? Oh, remember to go turn the world on. Oh, and they go turn the world off. Well, the day he died, no one had been in this office for 3 months. Power hadn't been on, you know, no one flipped on the lights or anything. And it was a calamitous day, and we were all running around trying to, you know, get the word out and let people know in as kind a way as we could about his passing. And then at the very end of the day, Kathy and another staff member came in here, and I'll be damned, that globe was on. And it had not been on for months. He's in there. We're convinced that the spirit of Senator Glenn left this earth, and he left behind that light. So he is infused in this building, both by name, but also his spirit and his ethos.
Yeah. I saw Amy just turn on and off her light there. I saw that. So last thing, or as you wrap up. So again, July 18th, this month would have been John Glenn's 100th birthday. And so let's imagine that we're having a party for him here at the museum. And he's like, oh, of course, he doesn't want to talk about himself. And you guys were in the room, and you had a chance to just go say hi to him. And knowing, you know, the legacy that's surrounded him or been created, nothing of his doing, what would you guys want to say to him if you walked up to him here in the museum this week, if this was happening?
I guess for me, and he knew this. So my daughter went as John Glenn for Halloween one year, and she dressed up and she pulled her hair back, and people, when she went door to door, they would say, oh, you're an astronaut. And she'd say, no, I'm John Glenn. And that meant so much more to her than just the outfit of the astronaut. And so I guess I'd like to say that when she looks at all the people she's ever dressed up as for Halloween, which includes Amelia Earhart and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she always talks about that moment. So I guess I'd like to let him know that his impact is continuing and his legacy is real, and to thank him for providing an amazing role model for me, for her, and for anyone that had the chance, even just to know of him, even if they didn't get the chance to know him. And thank you for that.
Yeah, I think I would basically repeat what Amy said in the sense that I would just want to offer him as much gratitude as possible on so many levels. I would want to thank him for what he's done for the college and the students that come through here, and in the way that Amy just described, just his life is an inspiration. But so many people give their names to things, and that's generous. He gave so much more to this college. He gave his time, his talents, his energy. He was in the classroom. I'd want to thank him for that. I want to thank him for what he's done for the community. The National Vets Memorial Museum is a great exemplar of that. What he's done for the state, what he's done for the nation, what he's done for humanity. I mean, he demonstrated you could be a successful person by pursuing goals that were bigger than yourself and ultimately redounded on everyone else rather than just you. And that is a model we need to see more and more and more. But I am absolutely certain I would have gotten about 5 words into that litany of gratitude, and he would have said, "Hey, Trevor, tell me about what you're up to these days." Oh, I want to celebrate you and all that you've accomplished and he wouldn't even say the Glenn College. He'd say in the college. And my guess is if Amy came up, he'd say the same thing. And he'd say, "Amy, thank you so much for your leadership in bringing about the National Vets Memorial Museum and your partnership with Guy Worley and helping to re-energize downtown. And I love my view from Miranova. I get a great view of all the good work you're doing." He would never let us begin to say laudatory things about him. So you basically get a thank you in. That would be it.
That's such a good point, Trevor. I do wish he had seen the museum, but I also want people to know that he saw every single part of it, except for the opening. He was actively involved in the reviewing of the design and engaging the architects and talking about the landscaping and understanding the importance of that memorial grove, and especially in the exhibition piece. And I remember he and Guy and Annie were in a golf cart in the last 3 months before he passed. And I remember thinking, oh no, that golf cart is so important. I hope Guy is driving it slowly. But did a tour of the greenways. They were interested in a lot of things, and then talked to him about NVMM. But I think Trevor hit the nail on the head. What we're saying, we're able to say because we're not saying it directly to him.
Yep.
Because he would just, that wouldn't work. But that's part of why it's so amazing that he was who he was and the definable characteristic.
Well, I can't imagine closing it any better than what you just said, Amy. And so, Amy, thank you to you. Trevor Brown, thanks to you for just sharing your thoughts about John Glenn. As people who knew him and we can all say we're better people because you know someone, but I think John Glenn touched so many lives in the small ways that people will always remember. Even your daughter is her favorite Halloween costume. So, and again, everyone, to learn more about John Glenn's story and his legacy about this museum, you can visit our museum Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. But we're open all the time online, nationalvmm.org, for all our amazing stories. Again, Trevor and Amy, thanks for being part of our July Spotlight story about John Glenn, his legacy. And tune in next time when we have more inspiring stories from the National Veterans Memorial Museum.